So before we start installing our operating system on VMware Workstation, I just want to mention the hardware and software requirements for Exchange Server 2016 and why do we need them. So one of the requirements for Exchange Server 2016 is a domain controller or Active Directory, which is which is a service that is running on your domain controller. So why do we need a domain controller when we are running an Exchange Server 2016? It is because whenever you create accounts, as we mentioned in our history of Exchange Server, like back in old days, some Exchange servers like 4.0, they required to have their own directory services where they were just pulling out users information, all user accounts and everything was in there. So in order to let the Exchange server to access users information, user accounts, they really need a directory services. So if they don't have any directory services, that means that Exchange server have no idea or information about anyone. So domain controller is very important part for Exchange Server 2016. And why do you need a domain controller? Domain controller is something that allows you to create logical containers such as users and groups. So this is a good definition for domain controller. You should have more than one domain controller for load balancing and failover. So in most organizations, when you're running domain controller, you always want to make sure that you have more than one domain controller, because if one of your domain controller goes down, you will have another domain controller to do the failover. But if you only have one domain controller and you have got no backup or anything, so once you have like 1,000 users account created, you will lose the information about 1,000 user accounts, and Exchange server will no longer function because the domain controller is gone. Exchange server no longer have access to the directory services to pull out user information. So Active Directory is a service that is used within domain controller. So you also have here the name of domain controller. You also have here the name of Active Directory. So Active Directory is a service running on your domain controller. And Active Directory or domain controller is a centralized server which works like a boss. Which works like a boss means that whenever you have a boss in your office, the boss controls everyone. So whenever you have a domain controller Active Directory, it controls all workstations, all machines. So you can apply different rules, policies, where you can tell the machines that when to work, like when the user can use it, when the user cannot use it, when the user can log in, when the user cannot log in, what options in control panel should be disappeared, what options in like start menu should disappear. You can apply different policies. So overall, the domain controller is required with Exchange Server 2016 and other domain controllers such as 2003, 7, 10, 13, because it's a directory service that is integrated with the Exchange in order to pull out all users information and access the directory services. So one other thing that I just want to explain is the hardware requirements for domain controller. So what are we gonna do after this? We're just gonna go and install the Windows Server 2012 for our Active Directory server that we will be using for our Exchange server, but we need to know that how much CPU I need, how much RAM I need, how much disk space I need, and what other things I really need to run my domain controller to make sure that it's going to perform well for me. So 1.4 gigahertz 64-bit processor or faster, that is really required. 512 MB RAM or greater is required. 32 GB of disk space or greater is required. Ethernet network adapter is required. So whatever you see in here is all minimum requirements. So minimum requirements means that you should at least have one of these, but you can have more than that. So most organizations, they use like 16 GB for their Active Directory, because they're running thousands of users. So for thousands of users, if you're using 512 MB of RAM with Exchange 2016, that is going to be a stupid thing actually, because it's your Exchange is not going to perform well, your Active Directory is not going to perform well. So this is the hardware requirement for Exchange Server 2016 when you're running an Active Directory, and that's the hardware requirement. So I hope you have learned something, and I'll just see you in next lesson where we will install an operating system for our Active Directory services.